Stop waiting for success to arrive. If you truly understood this principle, you would already be thinking, moving, and deciding like the ruler of your own empire right now. What if the life you desire does not require effort, struggle, or luck, but alignment? Neville Goddard taught that creation is finished, and your only task is to occupy the state of the wish fulfilled. Today, you will learn what it truly means to act as if you're building an empire, not someday, but now. Neville made it clear the world is a mirror. An empire does not begin with money, power, or influence. It begins with identity. When you assume the consciousness of someone who builds great things, reality reorganizes itself to reflect that assumption. Act as if is not pretending. It is assuming the end as real. The empire builder does not hope, wish, or wait. They know. When you mentally live from the outcome, every decision you make flows naturally from that fulfilled state. Neville emphasized inner speech. Empire builders do not internally negotiate with fear or doubt. Their inner dialogue is decisive, calm, and authoritative. Speak inwardly as someone whose plans succeed by default, and watch your outer world comply. Acting as if does not require force, it requires loyalty. You persist in the assumption even when appearances contradict it. An empire is not shaken by temporary chaos. Persistence is the quiet confidence that reality must catch up. From the fulfilled state, action feels obvious and unforced. Neville taught that inspired action follows assumption, not the other way around. When you act from certainty, doors open effortlessly, and the right people, ideas, and timing align. When you shift states, the world may challenge you. This is confirmation, not failure. An empire builder does not react emotionally, they remain anchored in identity. Stay faithful to who you are becoming, and the old reality dissolves. An empire is not bricks, buildings, money, or titles. It is a state of consciousness first, and Neville Goddard was uncompromising on this point. Everything you see in the external world is the after effect of an internal position you once occupied. Long before empires are visible, they are assumed. The mistake most people make is believing power comes after results, when in truth, results come after power is accepted within. You do not grow into the consciousness of greatness, you step into it, and life rearranges to confirm it. When Neville spoke of states, he was referring to fixed ways of being, identities you occupy mentally and emotionally. Poverty, success, confidence, authority, and leadership are not circumstances, they are states. An empire builder is simply someone who consistently lives in the state of command. This person does not wait for proof to feel certain. They do not ask permission from the world to feel established. They assume they are the source, and the world responds accordingly. Consider how differently someone thinks when they know they are building something lasting. Their attention changes, their priorities shift, their emotional reactions stabilize. This is not forced discipline, it is natural alignment. When you occupy the state of someone building an empire, small problems stop feeling threatening. Delays no longer trigger panic, criticism loses its power. Why? Because consciousness determines interpretation. The same event means something entirely different depending on the state you are in. Neville taught that man does not attract what he wants. He attracts what he is conscious of being. If you see yourself as someone trying to succeed, reality mirrors struggle. If you see yourself as someone who creates structures that endure, reality mirrors stability and growth. The empire is born the moment you stop identifying as a seeker and start identifying as a founder. This is why mental diet is critical. You cannot claim the consciousness of an empire builder while entertaining thoughts of insignificance, comparison, or self-doubt. These thoughts are not harmless, they are signals of the state you are occupying. Every inner reaction is a declaration of identity. When you react like someone powerless, you reaffirm that state. When you respond like someone established, calm, and decisive, you reinforce authority. An empire consciousness does not rush. It does not beg reality to cooperate. It expects alignment. This expectation is subtle but absolute. It is not loud confidence, it is quiet certainty. Neville emphasized that feeling is the secret, and the feeling of an empire is not excitement, it is inevitability. You move through life with the assumption that what you touch expands, what you choose succeeds, and what you build endures. Importantly, this state is not dependent on current conditions. You may be unknown, underfunded, or misunderstood, yet still fully occupy the consciousness of command. History consistently shows that great builders were internally established long before the world recognized them. The world did not grant them authority, it acknowledged what they had already assumed. When you adopt this state, behavior adjusts naturally. You stop over-explaining yourself. You stop chasing validation. You stop reacting emotionally to temporary setbacks, not because you are forcing maturity, but because the state itself does not produce those reactions. This is the true meaning of act as if. You are not pretending, you are selecting a state and allowing it to express itself through you. Once this shift occurs, the external world has no choice but to reorganize. People respond differently. Opportunities emerge without strain. Resistance fades. Neville was clear: consciousness is the only reality. Build the empire there first, and the visible structure will follow, not by effort, but by law. To truly understand what act as if means in Neville Goddard's teaching, you must completely remove the idea of pretending. Pretending implies doubt. Pretending implies separation between where you are and where you want to be. Neville was precise: assuming the end is occupying the feeling of the wish fulfilled as though it were already fact. The moment you assume the end, you collapse the distance between desire and reality. There is no waiting period in consciousness, only delayed reflection in the outer world. Most people misunderstand action. They believe action creates results. Neville reversed this entirely. He taught that assumption creates results, and action flows from assumption. When you act as if the end is already achieved, your behavior is no longer motivated by fear, urgency, or lack. It becomes calm, selective, and inevitable. You are not trying to make it happen. You are moving as someone for whom it already has happened. To assume the end means you no longer negotiate with uncertainty. An empire builder does not ask, "What if this fails?" Because failure is not part of the assumed identity. That question cannot arise in the mind of someone who already is the outcome. Instead, the inner stance becomes, "Of course this works, of course this expands, of course this lasts." This is not positive thinking, it is positional thinking. You are positioning yourself at the conclusion and allowing life to bridge the details. Neville emphasized imagination as the creative power of God in man. When you imagine from the end, you are not visualizing a future event, you are experiencing a present fact. The subconscious mind does not reason, it accepts. Once it accepts an assumption as true, it must express it. The world becomes the stage upon which that accepted assumption plays out. This is why emotional neutrality is such a powerful indicator that the end has been assumed. When something is truly done internally, it no longer excites or agitates you. It feels settled. When you still feel anxious, impatient, or desperate, it is a sign you are observing the desire, not living from it. The empire builder does not emotionally cling to outcomes, they rest in completion. Assuming the end also changes how you interpret delays. Without assumption, delays feel like denial. With assumption, delays feel irrelevant. Neville taught that time is only the interval between assumption and fulfillment. Once you accept that the end is secure, time loses its emotional charge. You stop checking, testing, and measuring progress because the inner decision has already been made. Acting as if also means refusing to react to appearances that contradict your assumption. The senses will often argue against the new state. Neville warned that the world will reflect your former assumptions before it reflects your new ones. The disciplined mind does not collapse back into the old identity when faced with temporary evidence. It remains loyal to the end. This loyalty is not rigid effort, it is relaxed knowing. You do not force belief, you return to it. Each time the mind drifts into doubt, you gently reposition yourself at the end. I am already the one who has this. From that position, choices become obvious. You say no to what does not align. You say yes to what feels natural. You act without strain. Eventually, the outer world yields, not because you chased it, but because you stood firmly in the outcome. This is Neville's law in action: assume the end, live from it, and allow reality to conform. When you truly act as if, you are no longer creating, you are remembering who you decided to be. Neville Goddard placed extraordinary importance on inner conversations. because he understood that they are the most honest expression of the state you occupy. Your spoken words may impress others, but your inner dialogue never lies. It reveals whether you see yourself as powerful or powerless, established or struggling, authoritative or uncertain. Every silent sentence you repeat inwardly is a command issued to consciousness, and consciousness, without exception, obeys. An empire builder does not argue internally with fear. Fear may arise, but it is not entertained. Neville taught that what you consent to mentally becomes fact. When inner conversations are filled with hesitation, justification, or self-defense, you are assuming a position of weakness. The mind of someone building something great does not rehearse explanations or anticipate rejection. It speaks from decision, not from doubt. Most people live in reactionary inner speech. They replay conversations, defend themselves mentally, or imagine worst-case outcomes. Neville would say this is living from the wrong end. These inner acts are not neutral, they are creative. When you internally justify your worth, you assume it is questionable. When you mentally argue for your vision, you assume resistance is real. An empire consciousness has no such inner debates. Powerful inner conversations are short, calm, and final. They do not persuade, they declare. Instead of, "I hope this works," the inner tone becomes, "This unfolds naturally." Instead of, "What if I fail?" it becomes, "This is already established." The authority is not loud, but it is absolute. This tone is what Neville referred to when he spoke of feeling as the secret, not emotion, but conviction. Inner speech also determines how you experience the present moment. Two people can face the same circumstance and interpret it entirely differently based on their internal dialogue. One says inwardly, "This is a setback," while the other says, "This is rearrangement." The words are different, but the assumed states are worlds apart. Reality responds to the state, not the circumstance. Neville emphasized that you must become aware of what you are saying to yourself when no one is listening. That is where creation is happening. An empire builder's inner voice does not rush the process or criticize the pace. It assumes order, intelligence, and inevitability. This assumption produces emotional stability, which in turn produces clarity of action. Importantly, mastering inner conversations does not mean suppressing thoughts by force. Neville never taught repression, he taught replacement. When an unaligned inner sentence appears, you gently substitute it with one that reflects the fulfilled state. This is not denial, it is selection. You choose which identity gets expressed through thought. Over time, this practice reconditions the mind. The nervous system settles. Decision-making becomes cleaner. You stop second-guessing yourself because the inner authority has been established. When the inner voice is aligned with power, the outer voice naturally carries weight. People feel certainty without you having to prove it. Inner conversations also shape expectation. When you consistently speak inwardly from success, you begin to expect cooperation from life. Neville taught that expectation is faith in action. You walk into situations assuming alignment, and remarkably, alignment appears. Not because you forced it, but because you assumed it. Eventually, this inner discipline creates a new normal. The old language of struggle fades. You no longer motivate yourself with pressure or fear. The empire grows quietly from within. And as Neville insisted, when the inner speech changes, the outer world must follow, because there is no power outside of consciousness. Discipline, as Neville Goddard understood it, has nothing to do with strain force or self-punishment. It is not about rigid routines or aggressive willpower. True discipline is simply loyalty to the state you have assumed. Once you have selected an identity, discipline becomes the natural refusal to mentally return to what you no longer claim to be. In this sense, discipline is not something you do, it is something you remain faithful to. Most people associate discipline with effort because they are attempting to hold two opposing states at once. They desire the end, but continue to identify with lack. This creates inner tension. Neville taught that when the assumption is genuine, effort disappears. You are no longer trying to become, you are guarding what you have already decided is true. Loyalty replaces struggle. An empire builder understands that appearances are temporary and often deceptive. The external world is always lagging behind consciousness. When circumstances contradict your assumption, this is not a signal to abandon it. It is evidence that the old state is dissolving. Neville warned that the final test of faith is persistence in the face of contradiction. Discipline is staying inwardly loyal when the senses argue otherwise. This loyalty is subtle. It does not involve constant affirmation or emotional intensity. In fact, excessive effort often signals insecurity. The disciplined mind does not obsess over results or timelines. It returns calmly to the assumption whenever attention drifts. This is what Neville meant by keeping the Sabbath, resting in the conviction that the work is finished. When setbacks occur, the undisciplined mind personalizes them. It asks, "What did I do wrong?" Or, "Is this not working?" The disciplined mind interprets differently. It recognizes setbacks as rearrangements, not failures. Because the end is already assumed, there is nothing to correct, only transitions to pass through. This perspective preserves emotional equilibrium. Loyalty to the assumption also requires restraint. You must refrain from reacting as the old self would. Complaining, explaining, defending, or emotionally spiraling are signs of a former identity trying to reassert itself. Discipline is the quiet decision not to indulge those reactions. You are not suppressing emotion, you are choosing a higher reference point. Neville taught that persistence is not repetition of words, but repetition of being. Each time you respond from the fulfilled state, you reinforce it. Each time you refuse to mentally collapse into doubt, you strengthen your position. Over time, the new state hardens into fact, both internally and externally. Importantly, this form of discipline is compassionate, not harsh. Neville emphasized gentleness toward the self. When the mind wanders, you do not scold it. You simply return it to the end. This repeated return is the training. Like any habit, identity becomes stable through consistent attention. As loyalty deepens, the need for conscious discipline fades. The state becomes automatic. You no longer monitor your thoughts because they naturally align. Confidence stabilizes. Decisions feel obvious. Emotional reactions soften. This is the sign that the assumption has been accepted by the subconscious. Eventually, the world reflects this inner stability. Opportunities appear without force. Resistance dissolves. People respond differently. The empire begins to form, not through aggression, but through inevitability. Neville was clear: persistence in assumption is the law. Remain loyal long enough, and reality must obey. Neville Goddard made a crucial distinction between action that is driven by lack and action that flows from fulfillment. Most people act from anxiety, believing that effort itself creates results. This produces strain, exhaustion, and desperation. Action taken from the assumed end, however, feels entirely different. It is calm, selective, and almost obvious. When you are truly living from the state of fulfillment, you do not force movement. You allow movement to arise. The empire builder does not hustle emotionally. There is no frantic energy, no compulsive proving, no pressure to convince the world of worth or direction. Neville taught that once the end is assumed, the bridge of incidents unfolds naturally. You do not need to map every step, you only need to remain faithful to the state. Action appears as a response, not a demand. Desperate action is fueled by fear of absence. It says, "If I don't do this now, it won't happen." Inspired action says, "This feels right." The difference is subtle but profound. One contracts the nervous system, the other stabilizes it. Neville emphasized that when the subconscious accepts an assumption, it organizes behavior effortlessly. You find yourself doing the right thing at the right time without overthinking. This is why forcing productivity often backfires. When you push from lack, your actions are noisy and scattered. You chase too many options. You say yes out of fear. You move without clarity. From fulfillment, action becomes economical. You say no easily. You recognize distractions immediately. You conserve energy because you trust the outcome. Moving naturally also means allowing pauses. The empire builder does not panic during stillness. Periods of rest are not seen as stagnation, but as integration. Neville taught that impatience is a sign the end has not been fully assumed. When the outcome is certain internally, there is no urgency to rush the process. Inspired action often feels ordinary. There is no dramatic emotional surge announcing it. You simply feel drawn to send a message, make a call, study a subject, or take a step that later proves pivotal. Neville referred to this as being moved under compulsion, though it feels gentle, not forced. You act because it feels natural to who you are now. Another sign of acting from fulfillment is emotional neutrality toward results. You do not obsess over feedback or immediate outcomes. You act, then release. Desperate action checks constantly. Did it work? Inspired action trusts and moves on. This trust allows the bridge of incidents to complete itself without interference. Importantly, moving naturally does not mean inaction. It means aligned action. Neville never taught passivity. He taught alignment. When the inner state is correct, outer action becomes effective with far less effort. One aligned step can outperform months of frantic movement. As this pattern stabilizes, confidence deepens. You stop doubting your timing. You stop comparing your pace to others. You recognize that each step is unfolding perfectly within your unique bridge of incidents. This produces calm authority. Others sense it. Opportunities respond to it. Eventually, action becomes a form of expression rather than pursuit. You move because it reflects who you are, not because you are trying to become someone else. The empire grows quietly, organically, and powerfully. As Neville taught, when assumption leads, action follows, and when action follows assumption, success is inevitable. When you assume a new state of being, the world does not instantly rearrange itself without resistance. Neville Goddard was very clear that the moment you occupy a higher identity, the outer world often responds with contrast. This is not punishment, delay, or failure. It is confirmation that a shift has occurred. The old state must express itself one last time before it dissolves. What feels like a test is actually evidence that your assumption has been accepted. The world is conditioned to respond to who you were. When you change internally, reality continues for a time to echo the previous identity. This can be unsettling if you do not understand the law. Without understanding, people interpret this phase as proof that Hoot isn't working. Neville warned against this mistake. He taught that persistence in the new state during contradiction is the moment of true power. An empire builder does not react emotionally to these tests. Emotional reaction is agreement. When you react with frustration, fear, or anger, you temporarily re-enter the old state and keep it alive. The disciplined consciousness observes without surrendering identity. You acknowledge appearances without bowing to them. You remain inwardly established while the outer world catches up. These tests often appear through people. Others may doubt you, misunderstand you, or treat you according to your former position. Neville emphasized that no one in your world is independent of your assumption. Their behavior reflects your previous self-concept. When you remain loyal to the new identity without resentment or defensiveness, those reflections begin to change. Tests can also appear as delays or unexpected obstacles. The undisciplined mind sees delay as denial. The empire consciousness sees delay as restructuring. Neville taught that the bridge of incidents is rarely logical from the surface. What looks like resistance may actually be rerouting you toward a better outcome. Emotional neutrality allows the bridge to complete itself. One of the most subtle tests is temptation to explain yourself. When you shift states, there is often an urge to justify your vision or prove your worth. This urge reveals insecurity. The empire builder does not explain the future to people anchored in the past. Silence in this phase is a form of authority. Neville taught that faith is remaining inwardly faithful without seeking external validation. Another test is nostalgia for the familiar. The old identity, though limiting, was predictable. The new state may feel quiet, uncertain, or empty at first. This is not emptiness, it is space. The former self dissolves before the new one fully stabilizes. Many abandon their assumption here, mistaking neutrality for loss. Neville emphasized that this neutral zone is where persistence matters most. As you remain loyal, something profound happens. The tests lose intensity. People adjust. Circumstances soften. What once triggered you no longer does. This is the sign that the new identity is taking root. The world begins responding to who you are now, not who you were. Ultimately, these tests are initiations. They refine certainty. They strip away emotional dependence on appearances. An empire builder emerges not because life became easy, but because identity became unshakable. Neville was clear: the state you occupy determines the world you experience. Remain faithful through the tests, and reality must yield.